Got it. Okay. So welcome everyone. My name is Christopher Lydon. I'm with Airlift, and I'm here with Ruth Yeager, who is also with Airlift. We'll be hosts this evening, kind of facilitating the session. And I'll turn it over. I'll come back in just a moment, but I want to turn it over to Ruth, who'll do a general welcome of not just you folks, but also our presenters for this evening.
Thank you, Christopher. Thank you, Christopher. Welcome, everybody. Oh my gosh, what a week it's been. Republicans torpedoed their own border bill. 2 Trump trials began today. Trump invited Putin to invade NATO countries. We all melted down a bit with the special counsel smear of Biden amplified by the media. And grassroots groups had a huge win Tuesday night in New York with Tom Sauzy's victory. We heard reports that phone banks to New York 3 by groups such as Swing Left, Indivisible, and the Bay Area Coalition were the biggest ever, and that residents got multiple postcards urging them to vote. Local grassroots groups such as Make the Road New York, like the group that Airlift funds, focused on reaching out to young people and people of color. That's the power of grassroots organizing, and you all play a part. From writing checks to rolling up your sleeves and calling, writing, talking it up. These are the elements of a winning ground game, and that's what we're here to talk about with Robert Hubbell. Later on this evening, we'll hear from Airlift partner One API Nevada and their particular ability to reach an often overlooked potential powerhouse of voters, Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. It's crucial that we support their efforts by making sure they have the resources they need for a winning ground game this year, which leads us to what Airlift's all about. Airlift is an all-volunteer group that raises money to help with elections. We fund highly vetted grassroots groups who work in their communities to turn non-voters into voters. Airlift partner groups connect with potential voters year-round by engaging them in the issues that matter to them. The groups we fund are especially adept at connecting with marginalized voters, young people, people of color, and working class citizens. After tonight's formal program, you're invited to stay for a brief presentation and Q&A about Airlift. Tonight is a night to learn and be inspired to continue the work to win elections. It's also a fundraiser for One API Nevada. We have a very generous friend of Airlift who has donated $5,000 to get us started. Please feel free to put your pledges in the chat at any time. So I have been a big fan of Robert Hubbell since 2019, when an Airlift supporter introduced me to today's edition. Like many of you here tonight, today's edition, it's really my go-to first in the morning read as I try to make sense of the news. I must confess that my most recent favorite edition was Robert's rant about New York Times headlines. And although it may seem that that has nothing to do with grassroots organizing, in fact, it has everything to do with grassroots organizing, because it is grassroots groups on the ground that counter the biased messaging from the media that voters and potential voters are exposed to on a regular basis. Our partner group, One API Nevada, has direct experience with countering misinformation, and we'll hear more about that later on. But now, without further ado, let's bring Robert Hubbell on for what promises to be a wonderful conversation.
Thank
Christopher
you.
and Robert.
Yes, thank you, thank you.
Hi, thank you.
That doesn't look like Robert.
Looks like Richard and Ruth.
It looks like Richard.
We've got the wrong people spotlight.
You got me, but we didn't get
I'll
Robert.
just take this brief interlude to say, first of all, thank you to any of my readers who showed up in response to my invitation. I'm honored that you would devote your time based on my recommendation. Thank you. And I also want to say that Airlift and organizations like Airlift is the answer to the most frequently asked question I get, which is, how can I make my donations effective given all of the choices out there. And what Airlift does is it does the vetting, it does the hard work. So if you're not on Airlift's mailing list or you're not attending its programs, I urge you to consider becoming familiar with its work. As you will hear tonight, they're focused on the groups on the ground doing the hardest work of retail politics. So with that, Christopher, take it away.
Okay, thank you. And thank you for that promotional commentary concerning. Robert's been with us for some time. This is, I think, your third time of coming back. So we do very much appreciate that. And when we spoke earlier this week, I really said there are kind of three buckets of information that could take a week to get through, and we have about 25 minutes. But the first one is really this issue that really occupies the headlines as if it's out of the National Enquirer, which is what is up with Trump's legal problems, legal issues, status of all that. And, you know, what should we pay attention to and what should we ignore? And just it's give us some sense of the morass that we witness on a daily basis.
So Christopher and I talked about this beforehand, so I've had a little bit of time to reflect on this, and I think there are sort of three dimensions to what we're looking at here. And the first dimension has nothing to do with politics. The cases against Trump matter to the health of our democracy. It is important that he is held accountable. There's no vengeance involved in that. There's no political payback. There is a sense that if we do not draw a line in the sand and step up to defend the rule of law, it will be easier for the next person to undermine it and violate it. So if the only thing you care about, the only thing you focus on is the fact of whether Trump's going to be held accountable, I would say that's good and healthy, and that has no time frame attached to it. He may become, let's assume he becomes president again. He still will be held accountable. In fact, we think he's going to be tried this summer in the New York election interference case, the hush money case. And it's important that happens because he abused the federal election process. So the first thing I would say is Trump being held accountable? Yes, he is. Yes, it's taking way longer than anybody would like to see, but we don't get everything we want. And I think we are making slow, steady progress towards helping him to be accountable. The second question is the political dimension. Does it matter to the campaign? And of course it does. Polling tells us that it does. But as I have said ad nauseum in the newsletter, and I apologize for repeating myself, there is nothing about any of these cases that will affect the outcome of the 2024 election from a legal matter. Trump can be convicted and jailed and put in solitary confinement for all we care, and he can still be elected as president and serve as president. So the legal process is about holding him accountable. It's not about stopping him from being reelected. And so I urge people to disentangle those two things, because I think that hoping against hope that Aileen Cannon will act like, a federal judge with integrity who's trying to serve justice is a fool's errand. She's a political surrogate for Trump. But she's not going to be able to prevent a trial from happening. She may be able to prevent it from happening before the election. And again, what matters is ultimate accountability, not whether or when the trial occurs. Moreover, I just want people to recognize, if anyone is not dissuaded from voting for Trump by the fact that he has 91 felony accounts against him, that in a civil trial for defamation, he's been found to have committed sexual abuse, which a federal judge said was the equivalent of rape, that one of the cases involves him, paying an adult film star for an affair to keep it quiet while Melania was at home with an infant son, Barron. Anyone who's not going to be put off by that, and let's not forget the coup and the insurrection, is it really going to make that much difference that he's convicted in one of these trials? I don't think so. So I don't put much weight in these polls that say, he's got to be convicted before November in order for it to make a difference. I don't think it's going to make a difference to many people. What really will make a difference is what we do. And the third aspect of this is a test for our federal judiciary. I think if I had to give it a grade, I would say that it's at a B minus. And if you were to take Judge Chutkan out of the equation, I'd say it's about at a D minus. I think that the federal judiciary, I guess I should give it a little bit of a better grade because of the DC Circuit's opinion here last week. But the Supreme Court and the federal judiciary writ large have failed to recognize the urgency of the moment and have been very concerned about their process and their timing, and not concerned at all about the public interest in a speedy and just resolution of matters of immense public interest. And I guess I would add a fourth point, which is to say that the Department of Justice has failed us grievously. And I'm hoping that soon Merrick Garland will resign. I mean, he can't undo the damage that he's caused by delaying the prosecution of Trump in the first instance. But I think any fair-minded prosecutor would have opened an investigation of Trump 30 days after January 6th. And the fact that he waited 18 months is why we're in the bind that we're in now. So my overall takeaway is justice will prevail, just not on a time frame that many of us are going to be happy with, but that's okay, because the most important thing is that justice prevails, because there will be a Trump in the future, and we want him to look back and reflect on what happened to this Trump, which is that he went to jail, which I firmly believe is the outcome of these trials.
So accountability, but don't obsess over time schedule, timing this particular ruling or not. But this overall accountability is so critical, not just for associated with Trump and his behavior, but to set that precedent that can be applied elsewhere, because there will be other people who emerge who also test this rule of law, is what I hear. Yeah.
Yes.
So the other gnarly topic that I proposed to you, and it really did come out of reading your today's edition, which is it almost feels like a media complicity with ensuring the fact that this both sidesism is kind of elevated, really. And especially the national media, I think, is one of the things you pointed to. So I'd ask us a very similar question to you, which is, yes, pay attention, but pay attention to what? And how do you sort through, I don't know, this conflagration of so much information coming from so many different sources? What do you make of that?
Well, on the one hand, we have to pay attention to it because it informs people's feelings and views about the election. So we can't look away. So we have to know what is being said. And that's why my newsletter started, because after Trump was elected, the natural inclination of my daughters was to look away. They were fearful and they were frightened. And Jill and I sat down and said, they have to remain engaged. So we will be the filter. We will tell them the news in a way that hopefully will be palatable to them, so they will not disengage. There are many influences that make this a shameful moment for the media, but I think we just have to say that the internet and social media and the collapse of the attention span of the American people, from long form news reporting and journalism to 15-second sound bites on whatever TikTok and Twitter, has destroyed people's abilities to really absorb the news. And so the media has decided, well, if that's what you want, we'll give you more of it until you drown. And It's maddening, and I think it's okay to be mad. A couple of readers have sent me emails in the last 2 weeks saying that they were disappointed because they thought I sounded angry and that my tone had shifted. And, that's not what I intend. But I am also human, and I think we deserve to be angry at what is happening in the news media. It is a healthy human response, and actually, what it has provoked is thousands upon thousands of readers of the newsletter and millions of Americans slamming the major media outlets for their biased coverage. And I know that because readers who have written to reporters at the Times and the Post and MSNBC are sending to me the letters that they're getting back from reporters. And sometimes they're very long and involved, and they may very well be form letters, but I can tell you that there was an editorial meeting where the reporters and their editors sat down and said, oops, people didn't like what we wrote. How are we going to defend it?
Yeah.
And you can see in the ebb and flow of, for example, the New York Times headlines, them reacting to reader input. And in fact, one of the letters that a reader forwarded to me said exactly that. They said, well, I know you complained about the 5 stories about Biden's age, but the next day we had 4 stories about Trump's NATO comments. So they get it. They understand that readers are calling them on balance. So be mad, hold the press accountable, but don't obsess over it. And the reason is that there is a dynamic at work that we are not going to be able to stop. And I'm going to write about this tonight, a wonderful column or discussion by Jennifer Rubin, who talks about the fact that the news environment we're in is, we have one candidate who's just a grotesque character who's self-immolating and, the antithesis to democracy. And you can write about that. And then over here, you have a guy who's a decent human being, who's been a good and successful president. And you have to write about him too. So if you have to write about this decent human being who's been a good president, you have to pick it around the edges of things that don't really matter to find anything worth writing about, because the other guy is so monstrous.
Right.
And the problem is that journalists don't have the self-awareness and the maturity in every article they write about Joe Biden to say, okay, we're going to talk about her report. But just before we do, remember that Trump wants to destroy democracy and said he wants to be a dictator, and he cheated on his wife with a porn star and ran an insurrection, and his son-in-law got a $2 million bribe from Saudi Arabia two months after. So with that as background, now let's talk about what Robert Hur said. But they don't do that.
It's
they just
the
go for the
context
headlines.
the context is missing. The reinforcement. Here's the framing. Here's the context in which this is happening, to remind people this is not coming as an isolated incident of this particular day or not.
Yeah, and I will also say, I think that the major media they're all afraid for their existence. I mean, the truth of the matter is the Washington Post would be out of business for subsidies, except for subsidies by Bezos. And, many major news organizations would be out of business. That's happened in Los Angeles with the Los Angeles Times. It's like a summary of AP News. It used to be a great newspaper. Now there are still some individual good writers, but they are running, like the LA Times, just already a husk of itself, just laid off another 100 newsroom people last week or so. So they're thinking, how do we compete with social media? How do we compete with Twitter and they do it by sensationalizing the news.
So in addition to recommending today's edition, which you might, as a place to go, is there 1 or 2 other places that you would suggest? These are places for our audience to really pay attention to, or spend some time lingering either with a writer or a particular group.
Yes. So if somebody held a gun to my head and said, okay, you get one news source, what would it be? It would be Josh Marshall at Talking Points Memo, and I would become a paying subscriber because then you get his editor's blogs. His observations and editorial judgment are unerringly right, and he takes a very pragmatic, practical, non-hysterical view of it. I think The Guardian is a fine source. It's just got, I mean, in Rebecca Solnit, for example, it's got, I think, the best writer in America, maybe in the world today. But also it's very fair reporting. I'm a paying subscriber there. I don't always agree with the people who run the Bulwark, but really terrific writing, thoughtful, anti-Trump messaging. They don't see eye to eye with progressive Democrats on everything, which is okay. They think I'm too much of a pansy, I guess is what I've corresponded with some of them, and they think I should be rougher. But really, they're Charlie Sykes and Tim Miller and Jonathan Last, and they've got other people there. And then, of course, I've been very heartened by the fact that voices on Substack have really come to be important. Of course, there's Heather Cox Richardson, but Joyce Vance and Quo and Dan Rather, Robert Reich, Lucian Truscott, who doesn't always write about the news, is a fine writer. And when he does write about the news, as opposed to historical things, I frequently cite him. Of course, Jessica Craven has a more focus on activism, but she's starting to do a little bit more news commentary.
So it feels like you just gave us a portrait of your day.
Well,
which is touching base on these different sources.
Yes, except I do read much more broadly than that. But you asked me about the sources that I trust.
Yes.
And
well,
those would be, and I feel like I'm missing one, and my apologies to whomever I'm missing. But
this is invaluable. It really is, because once again, there's a deluge of information coming, and who to trust, who's good, who's worth the investment of time and energy to really glean through is essential. I mean, it's and a challenge.
And let me interrupt. I apologize, Christopher. Just to say one more person. If my news intake was limited to television, and there was only one person I could watch, it would be Lawrence O'Donnell. I will say that sadly, Rachel Maddow has absented herself, except for for one day a week. But Lawrence O'Donnell has grown as a journalist in the last 4 or 5 years, and I think every one of his opening monologues, I think, is historic and consequential, and he has been speaking the truth. And most importantly, he can do two things that most reporters cannot do. He's able to listen to what his guests say, and he's able to ask a follow-up question. And sometimes that follow-up question involves challenging what the guest says. And almost no other reporter on television does that, but Lawrence O'Donnell does.
Very true. Very true. Let me shift the discussion a little bit to the kind of evening tonight and get your perspective on community organizing groups like one APIA Nevada. What's been your growth relative introduction to this entire constellation, galaxy of new groups that have emerged, and what's your perspective around their importance, and why support them? Why is it so important?
Well, I'm not going to bury the lead. I'm going to say, I think it's the smartest investment of your money is to invest directly into on the ground registration and get out the vote groups, because what we're finding is that we're in an election environment where elections are close, and what is going to determine the winner is turnout.
Mhm.
And turnout involves two things: registering voters and getting them to the polls.
Mhm.
And it's really changing the behavior of low propensity voters, or voters who have difficulty getting to the polls because of language barriers, because of economic barriers, because they are afraid to go to the polls because
Right.
they think there will be a guy with a MAGA hat and a gun standing out
Right.
front.
Right.
So, when I started writing the newsletter, my involvement in politics was I voted, and I usually wrote a couple $1,000s in checks each year, and that was it. And through the newsletter, I got to know
Mhm.
grassroots activists. And what is shocking to me is the first of all, the level of effort it takes to know your voters at the level of blocks and street addresses. There's nothing that can substitute for that except hard work.
Right.
But it's also the precision of those efforts because of the data required to get to the right house to knock on the door, or to get to the right cell phone to send a text to. So you have this combination of a need for data, which costs money, but then also the volunteer base to convert that data into door knocks, into phone calls, into
Mhm.
postcards, um, and also into registrations.
Right. Right.
Somebody will correct me on this, but I believe that it's every um, 4 years, there will be between 14 and 16 new 18-year-olds who are
Right.
eligible to vote.
Right.
And yet they register to vote at around 25% of eligibility. And I mean, so there's 10 million new voters every 4 years
Right.
who don't register.
Right.
And if we could get another 4 or 5 million of those to register, Joe Biden would win by 15 million votes or 20
Mhm.
million votes
Right.
instead of 7 million votes. So in many ways, well, I'm not criticizing anybody who's out trying to affect the outcome here, but I will say so much money goes into, big money advertising and,
Right.
glossy ads on television and that type of thing. But the most effective money is at the margins, changing voting behavior
Right.
between new voters and low propensity voters.
Right.
And that's what one APIA does. And you're going to hear from them, and I won't, purport to speak for them. But that's where elections are going to be won or lost in close races. So for people who are wondering, well, how can I leverage my dollars the most?
Right.
It's by investing in grassroots organizations, but not just any grassroots organizations that have been vetted so that that they're spending your money in a way that converts dollars into votes at
Right.
an acceptable ratio. And that's what Airlift does. And so that's why I think it's a wise investment.
Well, that's great. No, that's great. And I do need to pause our conversation and do a transition both to Ruth as well as to our other guests. But Robert, I once again very much appreciate your kind of insight, your experience, you sharing your point of view relative to what is happening in the world, as well as what we might ingest concerning information. All that's absolutely invaluable. So I do once again appreciate the kind of the time and energy that you've spent with us. And I need to transition things over to Ruth.
Thank you. Thank you, Christopher. Thank you, Robert. I feel like I don't have to say much more about the importance of grassroots organizing because, Robert, you did it for us. One of the points that you made was all these young people that aren't registered to vote and they need to get registered. But the really unique thing that happens with grassroots groups that I want to underscore is not only do they register young people, and there's lots of groups out there registering young people, but they actually then are helping them get to the polls. People who are low propensity voters need something like 6 touches to move from registration to voting. And that's what grassroots groups are doing. And listening to Robert talk about what's happening legally and in the media just really reminds all of us that the stakes are so high. We need to get people to the polls to be able to save our democracy. I am passionate about the work that the grassroots groups are doing, which is why I volunteer with Airlift and I donate money to Airlift. And I'm already a monthly donor. I'm going to make an additional donation tonight. And our generous donor, who has already donated $5,000, would do an additional $5,000 match for your donations tonight. So please pledge and pledge very generously. And now I'm really delighted to introduce Eric Jang and Amy Koo of One API Nevada. The Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander community is growing rapidly in Nevada, accounting for 1 in 10 voters. In 2022, One API Nevada remarkably connected with voters in 14 languages. So, historically, electoral work within the APIA community has revolved around just before the election timeline, we'll contact you, a campaign will contact you, mainstream voter organizations will contact you, but they're doing it mainly in English. Well, this, of course, leads predictably to disappointing results. So what does One API Nevada do? It connects with voters, not just at election time, but year-round, with language and messages that resonate with them. One API Nevada knows that their community isn't monolithic. They're well positioned to reach out to all sectors of their community. And Eric and Amy are here to tell us about winning the ground game in this crucial state. Welcome, Eric and Amy.
Thank you so much, Ruth. That's an amazing introduction. So thank you.
You're welcome. And let's bring Christopher on, because Christopher is the one who's going to be in conversation with you.
Yes, do you have anything else to say? Thank you very much, Amy and Eric. I appreciate it. So I'm interested in a little bit more, and we spoke earlier about this, of the work with young people in Nevada, because it's varied. I had a notes which of a whole variety of different things that you do, and not just in programmatically, meaning in a very thoughtful, conscientious way, and maybe just highlight for our audience who may not know anything about the work that you do, what some of those activities were this last year and what you're extending into this year. Eric, why don't you start us off and then we can move to Amy.
Yeah, so thank you so much, Christopher. And I think for One API Nevada, we are a 501c4 advocacy group with a 501c3 partner Asian Community Development Council that we do civic engagement, nonpartisan voter registration, which we're very excited to go to. We went to 11 different high schools on an off year. Last year, we didn't have any election, not even municipal in Nevada. We went to 11 high schools and are able to register an entire class of their seniors through the government teachers. It's one of the most exciting experiences. But then not only we register them to vote, we got them engaged. We want to keep them engaged. So it's not a transactional or cyclical investment. It means that we're not only showing up between, primary voting time, texting people. I'm pretty sure a lot of y'all got a lot of texts recently if you're in the primary state. But it's also making sure they know the policy on college readiness, financial literacy, climate action, that's human rights, a lot of things that young people care about, that we're doing that year-round advocacy, year-round organizing. And then issue-based organizing means when we build that trust, we build the relationship, and when during election time, we are able to make the endorsement, we're able to not only persuade them, we're able to mobilize them. So for the young folks, we make sure that we start building that habit as making sure that they feel empowered, because the biggest thing we're battling against, especially millennial and now Gen Z voters, is the apathy, letting them know that their vote matters and being able to do this work.
Right. Amy, there was one thing you spoke about, which is the move into from Las Vegas, not from Las Vegas, but in addition to Las Vegas, into Reno, and how it was culturally and politically a very different let's say, audience or group, but that's part of your growth plan. That's part of the education that you as a group. Could you tell us a little bit about that work and what you folks learned?
Yeah, definitely. So, Eric and I are both based in Las Vegas. I actually started out organizing in Reno, which is in northern Nevada. And Nevada is pretty unique because we're pretty far away from our city center. So from Reno to Las Vegas, if you were to drive, it's 8 hours. And so just like doing a statewide program has always been very difficult, especially when it comes to targeting AAPI voters, because we use a lot of really good data. We're very lucky to work very closely with a lot of partners in the state to be able to have good data about, for example, like place of birth data. So if people are naturalized citizens and they decide to register to vote in Nevada, they have the opportunity to share what country they were born in. And we use that data to be able to reach out to people in the language that they potentially might prefer. And I think that's the biggest draw of our programming and the things that we do is that we meet people where they are. So we're not trying to build a pre-made plan and kind of tell people why they should vote or like, do a field plan that's already pre-planned that doesn't fit with the community. We want to make sure that we're culturally aware of the differences, we're culturally aware of what the community needs. And so when it comes to starting our Reno office, that was a big priority for us. So we opened up our Reno office in summer 2023. So this will be our first year fully in operation. We're really excited because we are able to hire some local organizers, so AAPI organizers who grew up in Reno. And just the difference, I was a transplant, so I came from California to start organizing in Reno. And learning the community is really fun, but obviously I'm not a local. And so there's a lot of different things about local issues that I didn't know a lot about or wasn't able to talk to people about my lived experiences. And now with our young organizers who are locals, who are excited to organize their community, their local community, the community that they grew up in, I think that we're starting to see a lot of movement. Something that I always like to tell people is that if y'all aren't aware of Carson City is our state capital.
Right.
Very rural. It's outside of Reno. You probably have like driven past it if you've gone to Reno. We actually were able to do voter registration at Carson High School as well, and we've never been able to do that. And one of the parents actually gave some feedback to the teacher being like, I was initially very worried of like this group coming in and talking about voter registration to my student, right? They went to Influence Watch and Googled our name and like, they were like, oh, there's like left-leaning money in your organization. But at the end of the day, the teacher was like, I sent over your materials, and the parent came back to me and said that your materials are based in your values, right? We want to register everyone, no matter who they are. We want to make sure that people have the information they need to make the choices that work for them. And I think that's the key to our program, is that we make it personalized to who we're talking to.
Yeah, great. And then you had the added baggage of being from California, so that was problematic. Right. Eric, I want to pick up on something that Amy just said and ask you, which is she quote, I'll manage this quote, I hope, which is we were able to hire some local individuals. And one of the things that we say to our donor base, and one of the reasons why we're beginning this year with such energy, is if you're doing relational organizing, it takes time. And so tell us a little bit, Eric, about that, recruiting new organizers and getting them trained, and how much time it takes to not simply drop them in a parachute, but rather that they're part of the community.
Thanks so much, Christopher. I think that's something that I worked for from midterm election to presidential election. Amy did presidential for President Biden, his first campaign. I worked for Hillary for a while, and I've been sent to all the early states. I've been, and win or lose, no matter, a lot of young organizer gets burned out because you're dropped into the place. You're supposed to knock doors, recruit volunteers. I mean, a lot of y'all probably know your local party organizer, every campaign cycle, different people. So for locals, they think these are parachuters, great talent, great young folks, very enthusiastic, but a lot of them don't stay. They move on to the next state, they move on to the next campaign. And for us, being able to recruit locally, to retain locally, and moving people from high school fellows or interns or volunteers that we got and actually see them through college and show them that organizing is a legitimate way, especially immigrant parents. You have to prove to them that caring about the community, giving back is worth their sacrifice or their foreparents' sacrifice. And I think to prove that we can do community organizing or at time political organizing, really showcase how we can leverage the folks that's growing up here. I think that the new American voters, people that have to translate for their parents, people that have to navigate being a new country, and now being in the process of making this country better, being bought into the democracy values, the progressive values that we have. I feel like that's a very important thing for us. And that's the strongest way to push back against the dis and misinformation that we're seeing that's going rampant, especially in the immigrant communities.
Yeah, tell us just a little bit about that if you would, because I know some of that is language based, meaning here's the brochure, it's all in English, and you don't either speak English or not particularly well and relative to reading. But in addition to language, what else around misinformation, let's say, or disinformation do you encounter?
Yeah, definitely. Like I mentioned, I'm from California, and we've definitely noticed a lot of targeted outreach to Asian American communities, especially by Republicans. So the two Republican party centers or the buildings that they just opened are in Orange County, California, and Las Vegas, Nevada. And we like to mention that because I think Republicans as well are realizing that the AAPI community in Nevada is the margin of victory. And so when it comes to being able to outreach to the community, they're trying to make their messaging seem appealing to the new immigrant framework, right? So talking about things that are related to economics or to cost of living. So a lot of those messaging things are being utilized as weapons to reach out to the API community, but to frame issues in the way that they want them to be perceived. So that is a big part of the misinformation piece of it, is just framing these issues as Black or white issues and not really providing nuance for folks because they want you to see it in a specific way. And also Eric and I work with the Chinese American community. Eric is a big translator for the community when it comes to ballot issues, when it comes to information about anything. So Eric has translated a ton of materials for the Chinese American community, and we are starting to see a much more targeted approach to how people get misinformation. So for example, my family, we have a family group chat on WeChat, and that's one of those platforms that immigrant communities use a lot more, things like WhatsApp. And my grandpa will send 5 different links of just random headline catching articles. He doesn't really read them, but he sends them up because he just wants us to see them. And that's how misinformation gets spread around the Asian American community. And it sounds so simple, right? It's just your grandpa sending you a random text message with this weird article that you don't know and you're not going to read. But that's how misinformation spreads. And that's the thing that we're starting to see, is that they're really focusing on peer-to-peer outreach and really focusing on spreading misinformation within the community and from trusted messengers in the community.
Right.
Eric, I don't know if you have anything else that you wanted to mention.
No, I think this is something that both in the Latino community and the AAPI community are seeing, that a lot of time it is packaged. It's blaming inflations, blaming things on Biden, or using sometime dividing between the good versus bad immigrants. And I think that's a lot of things that we are seeing, we're catching early on, those wedge issues that we have mailers from Stephen Miller, from Trump's Stephen Miller super PAC, saying that whites and Asians are not safe under the Biden-Harris administration. This very clearly race baiting materials that are popping up in the community. So our job is to make sure we are the trusted messenger. We're able to, the good thing is we're seeing a lot of community members are bringing those materials, either online stuff, they screenshot it, or actual mailer, and hey, is this true? So we're able to prove no, this is not here. They at least give us a chance to kind of push back against it.
Right. What do you see for 2024, Eric? What are some programs and plans that you're attempting to put in place? Perhaps some funding would help to make certain it happens, just as a note. What are some programs that you're excited by, in addition to the extension of what you're presently doing?
Yeah, so the fast forward. So but going back in 2017, 2018, after the Hillary campaign, I worked for a private equity because I need to pay down some student loan. And 2018 rolls around, I thought to myself, it's great that I'm in a very privileged situation, but I also feel like I cannot sit on the sideline when one of the most important election is happening. And that's when I got recruited out here in early 2018 and work on that midterm election to flip the seat for Senator Jackie Rosen. So that was a Republican, Dean Heller, and then we were able to flip it. And from there, every single election after that is the most important in our lifetimes.
Right, that's
So
right.
the stakes are high. So from 2018 and 2020, we're able 2018, 2020, 2022. So we have three kind of electoral cycles, a lot of best practices we learn from the grounds up, but there's not a written playbook on how you reach out to a very diverse community. And we learned that kind of hands-on what kind of mailer work, what kind of digital ads work, where to advertise these, and what kind of script we're using when we're on calls, when we're on doing text banking, when we're knocking on doors. So for 2024, currently we are doing listening sessions, partnering with community groups. And that let us go in early on. We don't have to be political. We just sit there, have a guided conversation on economy, on health, on education, to actually learn what people care about. Because a lot of time, the best way to push back and motivate people is to tell them the actual policy implementation. IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Fund. A lot of things cover way more than people heard about. The administration had pushed out in a very difficult situation, in a very difficult Congress, was able to push out and implement a lot of amazing policies for our community. So our job is to translate it literally. So like translate it into Chinese, Vietnamese, Korean, also translate it figuratively about how to simplify for the community to understand that your elected official is working for you. Your elected official is actively saving you money. This is the kitchen table conversation, the pocketbook voters. So for us, 2024, we're starting early. That's why I'm so thankful for groups like Airlift. This is February 15th. It's already helping us. We're still part of Lunar New Year. Winter Festival. So for us, being able to build that relationship, find community leaders, even for us, even for the conservative community leaders that back in 2020 showed up for Trump, or they're like the steering committee or whatever sickening thing they do, we're able to still engage them. And now at least they're like, we'll be neutral. We will not speak up and lead. I was like, yeah, sometime I know you're not going to endorse President Biden, but at least don't go the other way. Let us help make sure that we get our talking points out. So that give us into the summer. And then we'll start a very comprehensive field operations. We'll start knocking on doors. And then when we knock on doors, we try our best to find community members to knock on community members' doors. So our advocacy, our rate is a lot higher doing in-language phone bank. And phone bank, even if you speak the same language, text bank is where it's at, being able to text people in their languages. So I think for 2024, the two things that I think we mentioned it that we're really good at, youth and the kind of the naturalized community. So that's being able to use your dollar, the investment here. And I think there's a data somewhere, and it's like an estimate. Early dollar, it's like what Emily's list is called. Emily's list. The early money is like East. So your dollar right now, like a dollar is like worth a lot more than an October donation.
It's like it's worth $10.
Exactly.
Yeah. And especially in your world where you begin entering whether community organizations or individuals with listening. And if you do that, and that's fundamentally with almost all of our groups universally have adopted as a principle of how they're organizing. But to begin with, that enters into a conversation that's going to be longer. It's not just dropping off a brochure. It's really engaging them in a discussion that's important to them.
Yep.
So I wanted to pause here because I need to return to Ruth so she can knock on some doors herself. we will have some time after the end of our program where we are speaking about airlift, but if you two could remain for 10, 15 minutes after, we often have an open mic, and that could be direct questions from our audience to you, as well as we could continue our discussion. So thank you for your great work. Really appreciate it. And Ruth, what's next?
Well, I'm going to let people know that we have raised, and then I'm going to ask Robert to come back on before we finish, but we have raised so far $19,380. I know we can get it up to 20,000 tonight, folks. So please pledge. Robert, any kind of final thoughts after hearing Amy and Eric speak about the amazing work that they're doing in Nevada?
Well, the only can you hear me? I don't
Yeah.
see myself there. The only thing that I would add to their wonderful statements is that what they're doing is terrific, and we all appreciate them, and we owe them a debt of gratitude. But I want everyone to take confidence from the fact that what they are doing is replicated thousands of times across the country, and you never hear about it. There's no reporter from the New York Times writing stories about one APIA and the work they're doing. It's as if they don't matter. It's as if they're invisible. And that fact creates a false perception about where we are. It's why pollsters are turning themselves into knots, trying to explain why they so badly missed the result in the New York 3rd Congressional District. They have lots of explanations, none of which involve them not understanding what's actually happening on the ground because of grassroots volunteers. So thank you for what you're doing. Eric and Amy, God bless you. Keep up the hard work.
Thank you, Robert.
Thank you, Robert.
Thank you for those remarks. Yes. Oh, and you guys, we just exceeded $20,000. So hooray. Thank you so much. I think that what we've heard tonight is really the testament to the power of grassroots organizing, and the way that Amy and Eric described the work that they're doing at kind of the macro level, dealing with misinformation, reaching youth, reaching recently naturalized citizens is so critical. So please continue to support One API Nevada, support Airlift's other groups. If you are new to Airlift, I invite you please to stay for the program, for a very brief program where I just have some slides to explain how we vet our groups, and to introduce you very briefly to the 10 other groups that we support that are going to help us win in November. We're going to win the presidency. We're going to flip the House. Hopefully we will save the Senate. We've got a lot of work to do, and the hard work that you do in writing the checks or giving your credit card is going to help us. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Robert, for being here tonight. Thank you, Eric. Thank you, Amy. It's been a fascinating conversation. I appreciate everybody. Thank you.
I need to go write the newsletter, so thank you for having me. Take care.
We're expecting it.
We'll read it tomorrow.
Thanks, Robert. Bye.
Bye.
So Ruth and I will be on for as long as people need, but typically it's, I don't know, 5 to 15 minutes or something like that. If there are any questions, or also share some additional information about Airlift.
And those of you who want to leave, you can leave.
Do we have outstanding questions to respond to in the chat that would be relevant?
There was actually one. Yeah, there was one question for Eric and Amy, because you guys are still on. What are the issues that people in your community are really interested in right now?
I think.
Go ahead, Eric.
I can go. I think right now economy. So before it was all inflation and gas prices and all this different. cost of materials, especially we have very strong small business program, small business owner program. But I think now it's our job to be like, hey, it is coming down. It is something and it's something that we need to do a better job for the Bidenomics, lowest unemployment rate, lowest inflation in all major countries. So these are the things that we need to tell a better story, because some people are still saying it. I'm like, once you think about it, is this still true? And a lot of inflation you're seeing is just corporate greed. So these are one of the first thing that we're hearing. The second thing is, especially in the Asian and Pacific Islander community, we saw the impact of kind of the foreign policy, how that impacted. So especially our South Asian community, our Muslim community, seeing what's happening in Gaza. So it's trying to find the right balance of making sure that we are telling them that, hey, we are here for domestic policy. There's a lot of things we can impact. And a lot of time, especially with our community, I'm from Taiwan, everyone is always asking, between Taiwan and China. And so we're like, no, we are Asian Americans now. So let's talk about healthcare. Let's talk about access to healthcare. Let's talk about education. Let's talk about small business and entrepreneurship. Let's talk about housing justice, environmental justice. So that's something that we're able to say, let's focus now that we're here. And yes, we help our community members bring their kind of foreign policy issues to our federal elected senators and our members of Congress, but we try to stay out of it because we know we have enough scope right now to focus on this. And that's where we believe it's like everyday people. That's what they're asking. That's what they care about as well.
Thank you. Thank you, Eric. I think, Carol, if we could bring on our PowerPoints for people who are here who want to hear a little bit more about airlift.
Yes, I would like to. Who will these be Chris's slides or
mine?
Okay.
Okay, so welcome for those of you who are staying to learn more about airlift. And Carol, if I can have the first slide, please. I think Carol, if you were able to unmute everybody, so if anyone has questions as we continue, please just feel free to just speak up and I will answer your questions. And Berta, if you want to take off, you can. Okay, so airlift. We are airlift, founded in, as you heard me say earlier, we're founded in 2017 to turn non-voters into voters. Carol, could you, next slide, please.
Yes.
Okay, so our goal is to expand democracy by turning non-voters into voters. As Robert Hubbell mentioned, there are millions of young people who aren't registered to vote. There are, in the last election, 70 million Americans did not vote. That was the second largest voting bloc, I believe, were non-voters. And we want to get those non-voters voting and voting their values, which means voting for Democrats. Next slide, please. So what do we need to do in 2024? What we're hoping that our partner grassroots groups will do. We want to keep the Senate. We want to flip the House. Got to reelect Joe Biden. And we want to help elect progressive state and local officials. One of the reasons that many of our grassroots groups focus on local elections is that people often will vote about the issues that matter to them most. And that could mean who's on the school board, how criminal justice is being administered. And once people get into the polls to vote about what's important in their neighborhood, they will vote up the ticket for other Democrats. Next slide, please. So our strategy is really different from traditional political giving. As Robert Hubbell mentioned earlier today, he used to give to campaigns. Well, campaigns really spend their money really right at election time, and they spend a lot on political consultants and TV buys. We know how TV buys are not so effective anymore. The Airlift strategy is different in that, first of all, we fund work year round. As Eric told us about the plan that they have year round, it means really connecting with potential voters here in February already to be able to help them get to the polls in November. Our focus is on battleground states, and I'll show you later a slide with the states where we're funding groups. And we focus on issues that matter. Next slide, please. So how do we choose our partner groups? First of all of our partner groups are located in battleground states, and we're in California, which is not a battleground state, but we have battleground regions in Orange County and the Central Valley. We want to fund groups that have strong leaders with a history of success. Even though many of the leaders, and Eric, as you saw tonight, are young, certainly significantly younger than me and many of us, but they've already demonstrated, by the time that Airlift begins to fund a group, they've already demonstrated leadership ability and have a history of success. Our primary focus is to focus on groups that reach out to young people and people of color, and actually in other marginalized communities, working class citizens, as I talked about earlier. We only fund groups that are year-round and are issue-based, and that they're proven coalition builders. They can work well with other grassroots groups. They don't believe that they're the only one that can do it and that they have to go and do it out on their own. Next slide, please. So who are our partner groups? I'm going to start with, in Nevada, we've got one APIA in Nevada. We'll move west. California, we fund a group in the Central Valley called CNC, Californians for New Communities, and OC Action in Orange County. California has got, I believe it's seven congressional seats that are really important to help us win the House. And if we can win 4 of these seats in California, we can help win the House. In Arizona, we have 2 groups that we help fund. One is Worker Power, the other is Lucha. And Arizona will be a critical state. Not only do we have a Senate election there, important Senate election, but it will be critical in the presidential election. In Wisconsin, Leaders Igniting Transformation is a youth-led group. In Michigan, we help fund a group called Michigan Liberation, which primarily works with formerly incarcerated men and women. And what's significant about that in the Black community, I believe it's something like 50% of Black citizens know have a relationship to someone that's been incarcerated. In Pennsylvania, we fund a group called Pennsylvania Stands Up. Those of you who follow Simon Rosenberg know that he is a big proponent of that this is the year that we can turn North Carolina from red to purple, or from purple to blue. And so we fund 2 groups in North Carolina, Down Home North Carolina and Carolina Federation. And in Georgia, those of you who were with us last month heard a presentation from Black Male Initiative Fund, a very important demographic in Georgia that's going to help us win the presidency. Next slide, please. So how do we win in 2024? Well, we think one of the ways to win is to donate to Airlift. You can donate online at airlift.fund. You can take a picture of this QR code, can write a check. If you're interested in making a tax-deductible donation, please contact me at ruth@airlift.fund. Later on in the electoral season, your tax-deductible donation is not going to be as useful because it can't be used for partisan work. It can only be used for voter registration and education, and voter education. But at this point in the cycle, if you're able to give a tax deductible donation, if that allows you to give more money than if you to give a regular political donation, please be in touch with me and I'll talk with you about how you can do that. If you have friends who would be interested in learning about Airlift, please talk with us about hosting an Airlift at home party. Contact Allison at airlift.fund. We can do if you're local in the Bay Area, we can do a party in person. If you are elsewhere, we can do a Zoom party, but it's a great way to really introduce your friends to the concept of grassroots organizing and the groups that Airlift supports. And come to our next event. I'm really excited about our next event, March 12th. Aisha Mills, who is the executive director of the National Institute for Reproductive Health, will be our headliner. And we're going to be raising money for Lucha, one of the groups that we help support in Arizona. Arizona is going to be really important in the abortion battle for two reasons. There's going to be a ballot initiative, hopefully that they'll get enough signatures. There'll be a ballot initiative in November to protect reproductive rights. And in Arizona also, they're hoping to have a trifecta and to be able to win both the governorship, both houses, both chambers of the legislature, in which case they'll be able to pass legislation to protect reproductive rights. So come to our next event. I think it'll be really a great program. Carol, could you take us off? And does anybody have any questions? Any questions?
Ruth,
Yes.
just had a question about the name Airlift. Just
Thank you very much. I forgot to talk about that. I love the name. So our founder, Danny Altman, was enchanted with the Berlin. Hi, Danny. With the Berlin Airlift as a child. As a child, and we airlift. So Berlin Airlift, those of us of a certain age remember that we airlifted food and medicine from Western Europe, West Germany into Berlin. We are airlifting money from our blue states to battleground states. So that's the concept of Airlift. Any other questions about Airlift? Okay, well, if there aren't, thank you so much for hanging out with us for a little bit longer. I see Eric is still on. If anybody has a question for Eric or Amy, why don't you chime in now? Otherwise, we will say good night. And thank you all for being here today.
Thank you, Ruth. Appreciate it.
Bye-bye.
thank you, Ruth.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you, Amy. We will let you know how much money we can send your way. Some of the money will come through Act Blue, so you'll have it already, and some of it will be C3 money.
All right. Thank you so much. We truly
Thank you.
appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you.
Good night.
Bye-bye. Hey, David, you're still on. You have any questions?
Yeah, how to donate to Airlift.
To Airlift directly? Carol, could you put that in the chat?
Yes, David, are you able to access the chat? Because I put it in response to your comment.
you did? I'm looking. I don't see it.
In the chat, there's a
Oh.
link that's HTTP. That's the blue
Way
link.
higher up. I thought that was for APIA.
You wanted to
They
just to
are.
airlift.
Oh,
No, no, no.
airlift.
I think I wanted to vote. I think
Okay.
I got
Yes.
APIA.
Airlift.fund. I put it on the slide with a QR code. It's airlift.fund.
That's it, and that'll bring me to.
That'll give you to a donate page.
Right. Okay.
Great. Thank you, David. Thank you very much.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you.
I'm also going to advise my email list of 70 plus to donate to Airlift.
Oh my God, that's awesome. You know what? I'm going to send you our last newsletter. Carol, do we have David's email address? We must, right?
Oh, we must.
I don't know whether you do or not.
Well,
may
you
not.
registered tonight, David, so I have an
I
email
did.
for that.
If I registered for tonight, then you've got it.
And then so you know what, David? I'm going to send you our last newsletter, which I encourage you, then you can forward that to your friends. It's a great newsletter that really talks about the work that we're doing. So I'm going to get that to you.
Okay, great.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's great to know where to give money.
Absolutely. Did you come from Robert Hubbell or Jessica
Yes,
Craven?
I did.
From Robert. Yeah. Isn't he great?
Yeah, he is great.
Yeah. Okay.
So it's been helpful with where to give money.
Yes.
Well, thank you for all this. I took copious notes.
Great. Well, you'll get a whole lot more information from our newsletter.
Sounds wonderful. Thank you again.
Okay. Thank you. Hi, Marty. Is that Marty? You still there?
Marty Jordan,
Yeah.
no video and no audio.
Okay. I'm going to just remove Marty and whoever this person is. Remove. Remove. Okay, Carol, we're done.
Yes, and we probably made more money because money was coming in even as you spoke at the end. And so it's very good. And I'm very impressed we could raise 20,000 in that, 10,000 in that short amount of time, because it really was appropriate not to raise money while he was talking.
Right, and no one did. No one put
And
anything
everybody
in.
was so civilized. The minute we started raising money, our people and other people jumped in and did it all very fast.
Yeah.
We had 3,000 come up on the Act Blue.
Oh, good.
And I send the name and the amount to
Allison,
so we don't double count, because some people say I pledge
Right.
such and such, and then they
Right.
go ahead. Now they're getting smart and they go right ahead and do it.
Yeah.
That's okay. I'm touching on how to give her the name of everybody who donates. So it's fine. Very, very well done. It was a very lovely, low-key evening, and Eric and Amy were tremendous.
They were great. I didn't know how
They
they
really
would be.
are a 1-2, as a 1-2 punch.
Yeah.
They were very good. And it gave the Asian American difference from our other nights. And
Totally.
I'll have Robert Hubbell back anytime. I was so worried about having all these people back, but these people are more relaxed when they come back to us.
I just got something. And the thing about Robert Hubbell, I think since he was with us the first time, he knows now about grassroots organizing. He really didn't know.
He didn't? Really? Okay, I've forgotten, because it was 2022, but he did see what the impact of 2022, I'm sure he caught on then, because the impact, everybody was a little surprised at the blue impact then, remember?
Right.
And everybody did see this grassroots stuff that the Democrats weren't doing or acknowledging enough.
Right.
Oh, I've got the recording on. That's very bad.